Hey everyone, it's Jackie Blakemore from So Much More Fun, and I'm here today with a belated Tuesday techniques. So today I wanted to talk to you about doing back adjustments. And yeah, for those of you that aren't familiar with these sessions, so each Tuesday I try and do a live video on how to start using patterns and making pattern alterations to get a better fit. I'm a little bit flustered today because I've had a bit of a busy day, but hopefully everything will go well, and I'll just allow a bit of time for people to join. So if you're joining, please say hello in the comments. Hopefully I'll be able to see them, and then I'll be able to answer any questions that you've got. This session is going to be around half an hour, I think. So if you don't manage to stay for the whole thing, it will be recorded and then it will go onto the So Much More Fun website, and it will also be on this page as a recording as well. So yeah, great to see you today. And if you haven't already watched some of the other videos, then some of the others in the series are also on the website and you can have a look at those. And we're going to refer to some of those actually today because it's important to do fitting in a particular kind of order, really. You want to do that in a particular order. So we'll cover that shortly. So today we're going to talk about back adjustments. And last time we talked about the front. We were doing chest, full bust adjustments and things like that. And the time before that, we were looking at shoulder adjustments. And so we start everything from the top, and we do our fitting from the top, and then we work our way down. So we did some small and full bust adjustments last time, and now we're going to refer to the back. So we're going to kind of look at that. Now, the reason that I'm raising that is because this adjustment really relates to, and I'm going to use my little dolly here to show you, but this adjustment really relates to this bit between kind of the shoulder blade area here. So it's not relating to the shoulder length. So if the garment is too long on the shoulders, then what you need to do is go back and look at the shoulder adjustment video where we talk about changing the length of the shoulder. But if it fits on the length of the shoulder, but you're either narrower or broader kind of across this region, then that's what this fitting change is going to sort out. And the way that you might detect that is that you might see kind of excess fabric sort of gathering here in this sort of bit behind the back of your arm. And that's if you've got a narrow back, then you might see that. If you've got quite a broad back, then you might kind of see this being kind of stretched out here across here, and it might stretch out across your shoulder blades. And so this is where you would make this adjustment. Okay, and then depending on how much extra you need to add, we'll kind of go through the details of how you make that modification. So there is a simple way for smaller adjustments, and then a bit more detailed way if you need to make a slightly bigger adjustment, and I'll talk about the numbers in a second. So yeah, so this is really concerning just focusing on this particular area here. So as you can imagine, if you've got a problem, like we said, with the shoulder area, you want to sort that first. So if I was doing this in order and I could see that the garment was too big, I would start by just making the shoulder adjustment because that might fix the problem. It might take out the excess more from the top. And so I would always do it in that order. And then once you've done that, if you're still getting excess bunching kind of in this area here and lots of extra fabric, or if it's too tight here after you've lengthened the shoulder, then again, you can start to kind of address this area in isolation and just fix these particular problems. The other thing that this doesn't really cover, and we are going to go on to this because this is a common adjustment for me, is if it's sort of too short in the back here. So this is called a rounded back adjustment. And we're going to go on to that specifically in another session. So like I say, it's really just more tightness or excess fabric kind of in the width across this direction here. So hopefully that gives you some clues as to where we are going with it. Now, the way that we're going to make this adjustment is, like I say, in two stages. So we're going to look at if you need to make a small adjustment or if you need to make a larger adjustment. And so I'm going to start with just if you need to make a narrow back adjustment. So if your body is smaller than the actual garment and you've got excess fabric here, we're just going to look at how you can shape that out so that you can take some of that excess fabric away. So I'm just going to change the view so that you can see that. Okay, so here I have my, just adjust this slightly. So here I have my back pattern, if you can see that. And on here, so this is like my centre back, if you imagine, for a bodice. I've just used the Colette pattern like that we've used previously. This is free on the Seamwork website. So if you wanted to try this and do it yourself, you can go and look for the sorbetto top on the Seamwork website. And so this is a PDF pattern, and I've just kind of shrunk it down so that it will fit nicely on the screen. And so I've got kind of, I think it's about sort of 3/4 size. So yours will be bigger than this normally. And the centre back seam is here. So this would normally go on the fold. Then we've got our neckline here, our shoulder, and then this is our armhole. And so I've started to make some markings so that I can see where I might want to make this adjustment. And so when I pointed out on the mannequin, as you remember, the kind of area that we're going to make the adjustment is sort of about halfway down the back of the armhole. And so you want to, again, if you're able to either get somebody to help you take a photo or set your camera up with a timer so that you can turn around and take a photo of the back, that can be really helpful. And just try and stand relaxed, try and stand normally and see where the wrinkles are happening or where the tightness is happening. And try and gauge, try and give yourself a marker as to roughly where that is. Maybe use a pen or get a pin and try and pin how far down that is where the problem is. Okay, so you're going to mark roughly where you think you need to make the adjustment. And typically it's going to be about halfway down this back armhole curve. But remember, this bit's going over the shoulder, so halfway might actually be a bit further down, if that makes sense. So, try and measure from where the shoulder seam is and get a sense of that. Okay, and then all you're going to do, I tend to just put a line here roughly where I'm going to make that change. And I'll just move this camera down a little bit so you can see that. Oops. There we go. And so, yeah, I'm going to kind of make this change about here. And so what we want to do is work out how much we need to reduce it by. So, and it's a bit trial and error when you're doing it on yourself, to be honest, because it's quite hard to pin this out. And so you might have to just, estimate roughly, pinch it out with your fingers and see, is it the difference between a small amount like 1/4 of an inch, or is it a bigger amount like 1/2 an inch or whatever? And then try it and start with a smaller amount first, because it's always easier in this case to take more out than it is to add it back in. Okay. So if the adjustment that you need to make across the whole of the center, the whole of the back is, for example, 1/2 an inch, then what we're going to do is divide that by 2, and we're going to just take 1/4 of an inch out from this side. And then what that will mean is you'll be taking 1/4 of an inch out from the other side when you've cut this on the fold. Hope that makes sense. If not, then just let me know in the comments. So I'm going to mark here. And normally what I would recommend is mark your stitch line on here first. So if the seam allowance, I'm going to use like a kind of 1/2 inch seam allowance. Normally seam allowance on most patterns is about 5/8 of an inch. So ideally you want to mark that first, because that's really, you're going to make the adjustment from the stitch line. Okay, so that's my stitch line. Then I'm going to come in my, let's say it's my 1/4 of an inch. So that's roughly where I've drawn that line anyway. So I'm going to mark there. And then I'm going to come, I draw that in so I can make my adjustment. And then I'm going to add back on my seam allowance. Now, you might think that's a bit of a faff, but sometimes because this is a curve, to get the most accurate change, it is worth doing that extra little step. So I want to make the change here, and then I know that my shoulder length is okay. And so I want to keep that the same. And then I am going to have to adjust, kind of keep this distance. So I've taken 1/4 of an inch off here. I'm also going to want to take 1/4 of an inch off and blend that to nothing on the side seam as well. So you can either do that by eye. You can start to, I would normally, probably for such a small change, I'd be inclined to kind of sketch it. And then it's going to come again back to where I should have drawn that in. Back to where your stitch line is down here. So it's going to blend to there. And so that gives you your new line. And now you would then redraw in 5/8 of an inch, if that's your seam allowance, away from there, or for me, 1/2 an inch from there. So that will give you your new cutting line, for example, here. But then what you would also need to do is make a slight adjustment on the side seam as well. So if you've come in 1/4 of an inch, then I would also, again, just shorten this as well. So this would come in here. And then that would become our new cutting line down here. Okay, so now when we cut it out, that's going to take off 1/4 of an inch on this side and on the other side, and that's going to reduce the total amount by 1/2 inch. And I probably would start with that to do that. Now, this is probably the maximum amount. If you're like a size 16 or below, I wouldn't do any more than 1/4 of an inch doing it this way. And I'm going to show you another way as well in a second. If you're a size 16 or above, then you could potentially take this up to 3/8 of an inch. So you could go a little bit more because you've got a bit more scope. But any more than that, I would say use this second method that I'm just going to show you. Okay, so hopefully that bit of it's quite straightforward. So this is the most simple adjustment, and it just means you're going to trim a little bit out here. It shouldn't have a big impact on, the reason we're making this adjustment at the bottom here is so that when you sew the sleeve in, the sleeve length, the resulting length will be about the same. Hopefully the circumference of the armhole will be the same. So that's why we're making this small adjustment here, because obviously the more we take this in, the longer this line becomes. And if we leave that on here, then your sleeve won't be big enough to fit into the armhole. So that's why we make this small adjustment kind of at the bottom as well. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. Now, if you need to make a bigger adjustment than that, it is possible, but again, there's still a limit there, and we'll have a look at those numbers in a moment. But really, if you're making quite big adjustments, I would then be checking back to see, are you making the right pattern size, particularly if you found you've made a big adjustment on the shoulder and you're making a big back adjustment. Maybe we should have been downsizing the size of the pattern or increasing the size of the pattern that you started with. So have a think about that as well. Bear that in mind if you were starting to make quite big adjustments. Some tools that you might find useful as well, if you're not very confident in freehanding your curves. And again, the way that I learned to do this is to try and keep your elbow in the same position and just kind of move your arm, and it acts like a bit of a compass. It acts like a compass, and so it gives you a nice sweep. So if you want to practice kind of doing curves, then you can keep your elbow in the same place and then just practice that. So just as a little tip there. Okay, so the second version of the adjustment that we're going to make, and I'll probably do this. Oh, sorry, I ought to say, if you needed to make this bigger by the same amount, you would do the same, but going outwards rather than going inwards. So if I had a bit of paper here, which I've got some spare paper, use this anyway. So if I've got my bit of paper, I would do the same thing, but instead of taking it in from the seam allowance, in from the stitch line, I would take it back out. So I would mark 1/4 of an inch extra, and then I would add on my 5/8 of an inch to here. And again, I would blend from the top down to my new adjustment, and I would be adding on extra at the bottom here. So I'd be adding on my extra and then blending that down to a convenient point on the bodice, so probably around the waist size there. So I'd be bringing this down to here and then coming out here. And again, because this line is now straighter, it's not as long, and that's why we're adding this extra length at the bottom. Okay, so if you're taking it off, you move the line in. If you're adding it on, then you just do the same, but add a bit of extra onto your pattern. Okay, so I hope that explains that bit. So the next thing we're going to do is if you want to make a bigger adjustment, and I'm going to just show you this. I'll try and show it in both ways and just not stick it down. So the starting point is that you need to draw a line parallel to the grain line. So in this case, I'm taking my centre back as my straight line, and I'm going to draw a line from the centre of the, oops, you can't see that, from the centre of the, kind of about the middle of the shoulder seam. And I'm just going to draw that straight down. And so I've given myself like a bit of a dotted line there to start me off. Okay. And then I would start probably about an inch down, maybe a bit more from the underarm, and you want to draw a line at right angles. So I'm using my gridded ruler here so I can see. I'm just going to draw a line straight across here. And then finally, where you're going to make your adjustment. So if you remember, we've got this line here. This is where I want to make the difference, the biggest difference really. And so I'm going to mark a line there. And now what we're going to do is we're going to cut this section out, and we're going to either move it in or we're going to move it out, and then we're going to blend it to our original pieces. Okay, so I'm just going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut this section and up to here. Okay, and so now I've got a little piece here, and then I've got my bigger pattern piece here. And so what I'm going to do, I'll just turn my little bit of paper over. So what I want to do now is either, depending on how far I want to move it in, so I'm just going to check my figures here to see what the maximum is from my notes. Bear with me 1 second. Yeah, so taking out a maximum of 1 inch for up to a size 16, or a maximum of 1.5 inches from a 16 upwards. So, and again, my pattern's scaled down, but what we're saying here is that would allow you then to take a total of potentially 2 inches or even 3 inches on a larger size out of this back. So you can make quite a significant adjustment, but just bear in mind that as you're starting to change this and change the shape, you know, make sure it does still fit. It would be quite a big change to make, to take 3 inches out of the back. But then, depending on some pattern designs, that, you know, you may want to do that if they're quite loose in the sleeve. And also, sorry, one other thing to consider is sometimes the pattern is designed to have a drop shoulder, and so it might feel like it's longer in the shoulder and then it's kind of wider across the back. That might be part of the design detail. That might be the style. And so to change the armhole of that, you might be better either looking for a slightly different pattern or finding a pattern that does fit you and then kind of using the armhole and the sleeve for that pattern, you know, over or combined with your other pattern. So hopefully that makes sense. But yeah, so look at the original design as well and make sure, see how it looks. So all you're going to do here is either move this piece in or out. It's like a bit of a jigsaw. And we're going to keep it lined up on this bottom line here, so that's our kind of reference point. And we're going to work out how far in or out we want to do it. So I'm just going to pick a line. I don't know. Let's go with 5/8 of an inch here. Oops. So I'm just going to mark my 5/8. Okay. And then I'm just going to draw my new kind of vertical line here, so I can line that up. And then what I would normally do then is stick this down at this point here. Let me see if I've got any. Yeah, I've got some sellotape. I'll just put a single piece on. And I can always cut it if we need to. So I'm making sure that it's level at the bottom here. And then I'm lining up, so make sure it's vertically aligned as well. So I'm just going to stick a little bit of paper here. So now what we need to do is we're going to keep this as the side seam because we need to keep this adjustment. And so the first thing that we can do, and the easiest thing that we can do, is then blend from this new position at the underarm, and again out towards, if the waist fits, then we want to blend to where the waist is. So we're going to just draw a line. So you'd have to add a little bit of paper on at this stage here, just to give you a nice neat line down to the waistline. Equally, we want to blend this section here. So at the top, again, I've not done this very well with my paper. Just get that right there. So put this back in. Beauty of live demos. So that would look like that there. Stick this down a second. And so I'm going to cut off this section here, and I'm going to add in a little gap here to sort of fill that in. So the other thing that we know is that the shoulder fits, and so we want to keep our shoulder point. This length is okay, but we want to now bring this to kind of blend with the new position of the center of the back curve, if you like, of the armhole. And so I'll just use a different coloured pen. And so in this instance, what we're going to do is take from here, and again, you would do it from your stitch line really. So you would draw your stitch line on here, and then blend that first and then add on your seam allowance, but just to make it easier to see. So I'm going to go from the edge here and I'm going to sort of blend this to where my new position is. And then that's going to become my new cutting line here. Okay. Does that make sense? So you're going to take some off here to bring this in, and then we're going to keep the bottom part of the armhole still the same. And then because this is now longer than this, just based on geometry, we've also now allowed for that by taking out from the side seam here. So the actual sleeve should still fit the same into this curve. You shouldn't have to make an adjustment on the sleeve necessarily. And that should still fit. Okay, so yeah, so I can just see a question from my mum saying she's just done a narrow back adjustment following this procedure, but didn't make any alteration around the seam line under the armhole. Would this mean that the sleeve head will not fit as well, as I didn't make the adjustment? Yeah, I do understand that. So if it's only a small change and there's quite a bit of ease in the sleeve, then it won't make a difference. If you've kind of just made a small adjustment, then you'll probably get away with it, because there'll be there's usually extra fabric allowed in the top of the sleeve head anyway, so that you can ease it into the armhole. But if you're going to do that pattern again, I would recommend, to get the nice fit for the sleeve, I would take this extra off at the side seam, and then you just guarantee that you're going to get the same fit as you would have in the original design and the original pattern. What you might find is that the sleeve has a bit less, if I just bring myself back on the camera, bear with me a second. Yeah, what you might find is that you've got a bit less give in the back of the sleeve here, because you've kind of stretched this out. Normally you want a bit of extra in the sleeve, so you've got a bit of gather here, and that just allows you to move your arm quite nicely. And so, but if it's only a small adjustment, you'd get away with it probably if you probably take it up in the ease that was in the back of the sleeve. But if you're making these bigger adjustments, definitely I would say you do want to adjust it under the armhole. So yeah, great question. And so that's so just going back to the camera, so that's basically how you would make the adjustment to make it narrower. And so just to recap on the figures, so what we're saying, this is great if you have to make an adjustment that's more than ½ an inch across the back. So in other words, each bit being more than +1/4 inch. And if you want to make an adjustment up to a maximum of 1 inch for up to a size 16, or 1.5 inches up to above a size 16. So don't try and move this in, sort of more than that really. Yeah, so that will take care of that. So the opposite of that then, if I'm to just take this bit off, so if it's too narrow and you want to make it wider, you just do the same but in reverse. So you take it out by that amount. So if I was just to stick this down here, and then now what you're going to be doing is adding in, need another colour pen really, is adding in this extra. So we're going to be filling this gap in. Can you see? So we're going to make this a bit of a straighter line down here, and that's going to give you more fabric kind of across that center part of the back. And then we're going to have extra, again, because this line is shorter than this line, we're going to add extra in under the arm, and then we can just draw again our new line down. So we're going to have slightly wider at the side seam. And also, if you think about it, if you're quite broad in the back here, it doesn't just stop at that bit. It might be helpful to have a bit extra further down as well, so it sort of blends down the pattern and blends down the fabric. Yeah, so that's the adjustment. Just bring this back. But as I mentioned at the beginning, if we've made an assumption in this example that the shoulder length is the same, because if you spotted that when we're making the adjustment, we're not changing the distance of the shoulder. We're assuming that that's correct. So for this adjustment to work, start from the shoulder seam. Go from there, and then once you've fitted that, if you've still got excess fabric sort of in this region, like we said before, then start to do it in 2 stages, I would say. And and that's the first time you do it. If this is a common thing for you and you find in a lot of patterns, then you might just be able to make this straight off the bat, and you will spot themes with patterns that, you know, particular brands, you might have to make the same adjustment, and you might do that kind of over and over again. So hopefully that gives you some tips. I'm sorry that we had to adjust the time, but it's great to see maybe this is a better time because more people are here and getting a chance to have a look. So great to see you all, and thank you so much. Thanks, Mum, for asking a question. Always love it when you do that. And so the next session, I think we're going to be looking at rounded backs. And so that is if you, I don't know if I can show you on here, but I sit at the computer too long, and so I have a bit of a rounded back, not quite that bad. But what you might find is if you feel like your tops are never, always feel like they're falling backwards or they're too low, and you want to kind of have them fitting a bit closer to your neck at the back, then this can be a really great adjustment for that. So I'm going to be covering that next time. And yeah, and then we'll kind of do the video and do the recording. So if you're watching this in the replay, then let me know. And if you've got any questions, I'll pick those up as well. Thanks to everybody for the great feedback I've had over the last couple of weeks for some of the sessions, and some of the people that have been watching on YouTube as well. And it's great, you know, it's great to know that it's helping. And if you've got any particular topics that you'd like to see that haven't got on the schedule yet, then let me know. One thing that was asked for is how to make a pattern bigger if you're outside of the size range, and so I'm going to do some work on that, and then we'll cover that as well. So yeah, if there's anything particular that you're struggling with, then let me know, and I'll see if I can help. So thanks very much, and that's everything for this evening. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Bye for now.